The silence in the evergreen funeral home chapel wasn't peaceful. It was an aggressive, swallowing quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I stood beside Jeremiah's casket, polished mahogany, simple, the way he would have wanted, with my palm flat against its cool surface. Through the wood, I imagined I could feel the last remnants of his warmth, though I knew that was impossible. He'd been gone for 5 days. 47 years. We'd built 47 years together in this city, in this life. We'd raised children, buried parents, celebrated triumphs, weathered recessions. And now, for his final send-off, I was the only one here. The pews stretched behind me in desolate rows of empty polished oak. 20 rows of 10. 200 empty seats. Each one felt like a judgment. The funeral director, Evan, he'd introduced himself with a business card and a handshake that was too damp, hovered near the door. He was young, maybe 25, with the carefully cultivated solemnity of someone who'd learned grief from a textbook. Every 30 seconds, his eyes darted from the antique clock on the wall to the heavy oak doors at the back, as if expecting a crowd to materialize. "Mrs. Hampton?" His whisper cut through the thick air. "It's 2:05. Would you like me to delay a bit? Sometimes traffic on I-85. I didn't look at him. My eyes were fixed on the spray of white lilies draped over the closed half of the casket. They were too perfect, too symmetrically arranged. Funeral flowers. Jeremiah hated cut flowers. "Why bring something into the house just to watch it die?" he'd say. He preferred the roses in our backyard, the ones he'd planted the year we bought the house, when we were 26 and pregnant with Kaylin, and so broke we ate oatmeal for dinner 3 nights a week. He'd tended those roses for 43 years. He knew each bush by a name: Big Red, Scarlet, Valentine, Eleanor, after me, though I'd told him roses shouldn't have human names. I should have brought a rose. A single, imperfect red rose from our garden. But in the numbing blur of the last week, making arrangements, signing papers, notifying people who didn't seem to need notifying, I hadn't thought of it. "No," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me, steadier than I felt, firmer. "We'll start. Jeremiah was a punctual man. He'd appreciate us beginning on time." Evan nodded, relief flashing across his smooth face. He signalled to the pastor. Reverend Miller was a kind man, with gentle eyes and a soft voice. He'd never met Jeremiah. I'd chosen him because his church was nearby, and because when I'd called, his secretary hadn't asked intrusive questions about expected attendance. He took his place behind the simple podium and opened his Bible. "We gather here today to celebrate the life of Jeremiah Robert Hampton," he began, his voice a soothing, practiced murmur. "A beloved husband, father, and friend." I stopped listening after that. The words were generic, meant to fit any man. They didn't fit Jeremiah. Jeremiah wasn't a good man. He was stubborn and opinionated and could hold a grudge like nobody's business. He was also the most loyal person I'd ever known, with a sense of integrity so rigid it sometimes bordered on inconvenient. He believed in showing up. Always. My gaze drifted from the pastor to the empty seats. The first pew, where our children should have been, was a yawning space of absence. 5 empty chairs. Kaylin and his wife Chloe. Anaya. Our grandson Damani. Not one of them. Kaylin had sent a text at 11:47 last night. "Sorry, Mum, can't make it tomorrow. Big meeting in Miami, the Anderson deal. $2 million on the line. Can't reschedule. I'll call you next week. Thinking of you. No, is there another service? No, can I come this weekend? No, how are you holding up?" Just the facts of his importance, with my grief slotted in as a minor footnote. I could picture him in some sleek, glass-walled conference room overlooking Biscayne Bay, wearing the Italian suit Jeremiah had quietly told me cost more than our first car. He'd glance at his diamond-encrusted watch, a gift from Chloe for their 10th anniversary, and maybe, just for a second, think, Dad's funeral is about now, before turning his attention back to the PowerPoint presentation. Anaya was worse. She hadn't even texted. Her assistant, a woman named Brittany with a voice so professionally smooth it was devoid of all humanity, had called me 2 days ago. Miss Hampton sends her deepest condolences. She's currently indisposed and unable to travel. She'll reach out when she's able. Indisposed. The word echoed in the hollow chapel. It sounded like something you'd say about a minor stomach upset, not about missing your father's funeral. I'd asked what indisposed meant. Was she ill? Hospitalized? She's taking some necessary personal time, Brittany had said, her tone indicating the subject was closed. The brief service ended with a tiny recording of Amazing Grace from a hidden speaker. The sound was thin and reedy in the vast emptiness. Evan stepped forward and asked if I wanted a moment alone with the casket before we proceeded to the cemetery. I shook my head. What was there to say to a box? All my words had been spent in the hospice room, holding his hand, whispering memories and promises as his breathing grew slower, then stopped altogether. I followed the casket out to the single black hearse. No procession of cars, just one town car for me. Evan drove with a solemn slowness that made the 4-mile journey to Green Meadows Cemetery feel endless. The cemetery was on a hill, and the October wind was sharp. It whipped my black coat around my legs and stole the warmth from my skin. I didn't cry. I was all cried out. The tears had been spent in the 6-month marathon of his illness. The diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The failed chemo. The slow, brutal decline. The final 2 weeks in hospice where he was more ghost than man. The graveside service was even briefer. A few more words from Reverend Miller, his Bible pages fluttering in the wind. The casket suspended over the open earth. 2 gravediggers stood at a respectful distance, their faces professionally blank. Reverend Miller nodded to me. I stepped forward. I hadn't taken the ceremonial velvet pouch of dirt from Evan. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers closed around what I'd brought from home. A mixture of dry soil from Jeremiah's vegetable garden and crumbled petals from the last roses of the season. I'd gathered them this morning, my hands trembling, the scent of earth and dying flowers filling my kitchen. I tossed the handful into the grave. It scattered across the polished mahogany lid with a soft, final sound. "Goodbye, my love," I whispered. But the wind snatched the words away immediately. As I turned, I saw Evan checking his phone, discreetly, thumb scrolling. The modern gesture of disengagement. Even here, even now. The house on Maple Crest Drive was a pale yellow ranch with a wide porch and a sloping backyard. We bought it in 1978, the year after Kaylin was born. Jeremiah had painted the shutters himself. I'd planted the hydrangeas by the front steps. Over the decades, we'd added the sunroom, replaced the roof twice, watched the oak tree in the front yard grow from a sapling to a towering giant. Now, it was a museum of ghosts. I let myself in, the familiar creak of the door a sound from another life. The silence inside was different from the chapel's. This was a living silence, thick with memory. It hummed with the echo of Jeremiah's laughter, the scratch of his pen as he did the crossword puzzle, the faint whistle he made when he was concentrating. His house slippers, worn leather, moulded to the shape of his feet, were still next to his recliner. The lazy boy he'd refused to replace, even when the leather cracked. The TV remote was positioned exactly where he'd left it, aligned with a coaster he never used. A half-finished biography of Thurgood Marshall lay open on the ottoman, a grocery store receipt marking his page. I walked through the rooms like a stranger. The kitchen, where he'd made his famous Sunday omelettes. The living room, where we'd argued good-naturedly over the evening news. The hallway, lined with framed photographs that charted the arc of our existence. Our awkward wedding day smiles, 1975. Kaylin as a gap-toothed 7-year-old holding a soccer trophy, 1985. Anaya in her high school graduation cap, 1999. Both of us beaming with a pride we believed was infinite. Now, that pride felt like ash in my mouth. I went to the small walnut liquor cabinet we'd bought on our 10th anniversary. I bypassed the cooking sherry and the fancy liqueurs and pulled out the bottle of Blanton's Gold Top bourbon. The special occasion bourbon. Jeremiah had bought it for our 45th anniversary. We'd had one glass each, saving the rest for something. If this wasn't a special occasion, I don't know what was. I poured 2 fingers into one of the crystal tumblers we'd received as a wedding gift and almost never used. The crystal was heavy, cold. I carried it to his recliner and sat down in his spot. The leather was cool through my dress. I inhaled deeply, expecting his scent. Old Spice, garden soil, the faint metallic hint of the engineering firm he'd run for 30 years. But it was already fading, replaced by the neutral smell of a house settling into absence. Then, driven by a compulsion I couldn't name, a masochistic need to confirm the depth of the betrayal, I picked up my phone from the side table. I rarely used social media. Jeremiah had called it the grandstanding book. But I had accounts, created years ago at Anaya's insistence. Just to see the pictures of Damani, Mum. I followed both of my children, a silent digital ghost watching their curated lives unfold. I opened Instagram. Anaya's profile was first on my feed. She had posted 3 hours ago. The timestamp was 2:15 p.m., exactly when her father's funeral was beginning. It wasn't one photo, it was a carousel. I swiped through them, my fingers growing colder with each image. A cold, hard nausea rose in my throat, bitter and choking. Indisposed. She wasn't ill. She wasn't tending to an emergency. She was on a yacht, in Florida, toasting herself, while I was standing in a wind-whipped cemetery, throwing dirt on her father's coffin. My hand trembled, making the ice cubes in my bourbon clink like tiny, mocking bells. I kept scrolling. Kaylin had also posted. A selfie in a stark, modern conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Miami skyline. He wore a tailored navy suit and a headset. He was giving a thumbs up to the camera, a tight, triumphant smile on his face. No mention of his father. Not a word about grief, loss, family. Not even a subdued, thinking of my family today. As if this day, October 23rd, the day we laid Jeremiah Robert Hampton in the ground, was just another Tuesday on the path to victory. I switched off the phone. The screen went black, reflecting my own shattered face back at me, pale, older than I remembered, eyes hollow. I took a long, burning swallow of the bourbon. It seared a path down my throat, momentarily warming the cold knot in my stomach. My gaze lifted to the wall opposite the recliner. The 40th anniversary photograph. Jeremiah and I, standing on the back porch right here at this house. We were smiling, his arm around my shoulders, my head leaning against him. We were holding hands. Behind us, Jeremiah's rose bushes were in full, glorious, riotous red bloom. Now, like him, they were gone. Not just dormant for winter, neglected. I'd been so consumed with his care that I'd forgotten to water them this fall. Their canes were brown and brittle, the last few leaves clinging on, skeletal and dead. I looked from the photograph of our vibrant, united past to the empty recliner, to the dark phone that had just shown me my children's vibrant, fatherless present. A resolve formed in my chest. Not hot anger, but something colder, harder, more durable. It crystallized the chaos of my grief into a single, clear, unshakable purpose. Tomorrow, I said aloud to the empty room. My voice didn't echo this time. It was absorbed by the waiting silence. Tomorrow, I will call Charles Owens. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, Jeremiah's chair across from me achingly empty, and I made a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, accounting. At the top of a fresh legal pad, I wrote, what was given, what was taken. Then I began the inventory, not of assets, but of investments, of love, time, money, hope. That was the final column, the ledger entry that closed the account. The next morning, my call to Charles Owens was expected. Eliza. His familiar, gravelly voice came down the line. Charles had been our lawyer since 1982. He'd drawn up the incorporation papers for Hampton Engineering, handled our house purchase, and advised us through every major decision. He was in his late 70s now, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human folly. I heard about Jeremiah. My God, I'm sorry. A finer man never walked. And I heard about the service. Of course he'd heard. In Atlanta, in our social and professional circles, an empty funeral was a seismic event. News travelled on hushed, scandalized whispers. Charles, I said, using the name only old friends used, I need you to come to the house. Today. And I need you to bring the current will. A pause. A lawyer's pause. Measuring. Eliza, grief can make us. This isn't grief, Charles, I interrupted, my voice calm and steely. This is clarity. They showed Jeremiah and me exactly who they are. Now, I need to show them who I am. Be here at 11. At 11:05 a.m., Charles sat across from me at the kitchen table. The brown leather folder labelled Last Will and Testament of Jeremiah R. and Miriam L. Hampton between us. He'd read my ledger of loss. His old, spotted hands rested on the paper, not opening it. They're your children, Eliza. Your only heirs. This will, it's simple. Fair. The estate, the house, the cabin in Blue Ridge, the investments, the life insurance, is split evenly between them. A separate educational trust for Damani. It's what you and Jeremiah wanted 2 years ago. It's a reward for abandonment, I said flatly. Jeremiah would be sick. You know he would. He built that cabin with his own hands, Charles. For my family. Not for strangers who can't be bothered to see him off. What is it you want to do? I want to disinherit them. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. You can't fully disinherit a spouse in Georgia, but you can have children. However, they will contest it. They'll claim undue influence, testamentary incapacity due to grief. They'll hire lawyers and make it ugly. I'm of sound mind and body, and you're my witness, I said. But I have a different idea. I don't want to just cut them off into silence. I want them to know why. I want it to be a lesson, one Jeremiah tried to teach them their whole lives. I laid out my plan. Not a simple revocation, but a restructuring. Charles listened. his bushy white eyebrows rising higher with each detail. When I finished, he let out a long, slow whistle. That's theatrical, Eliza, and legally complex. But with the right trusts and conditions, it's defensible. However, it will burn every bridge. There will be no coming back from this. Is that truly what you want? I looked at Jeremiah's empty chair. I thought of the yacht, the conference room, the empty pews. The bridge, I realized, was already ash. They'd torched it from their side, with their champagne toasts and million-dollar deals. I'm sure, I said. Draw it up. The new will, the irrevocable trust, the conditions, everything. And Charles? I need it by Friday. The new documents were ready on Thursday. I signed them in Charles's office with a hand that did not shake. Each signature, Miriam L. Hampton, felt like laying down a burden I'd carried for decades. The burden of hope. I didn't tell Kaylin or Anaya. Let the silence be its own message for a while. The first crack in their oblivious world came from Anaya. She called the following Tuesday, her voice a masterclass in performative concern. Mom? Hi. How are you holding up? The question felt scripted. I'm managing, Anaya. How are you? A slight pause. Oh, busy. Listen, Damani mentioned you've been talking about some project? With the cabin? Word travelled fast in our family, but only when money was involved. Damani had innocently mentioned my asking for the cabin's property survey. I'm considering some options for the property, yes. Mom? Her tone shifted, becoming gently chiding. With Dad just gone, this might not be the time for big decisions. Grief does funny things to our judgment. The condescension was a thin veil over her panic. She wasn't worried about my judgment. She was worried about her inheritance. My judgment has never been clearer, I replied, my voice even. How was Florida? The weather looked lovely in your pictures. The silence on the other end was profound, filled with the sudden, chilling understanding that I had seen the posts, that I knew. That was a pre-planned client retreat. It was unavoidable. I'm sure it was, I said, and hung up the phone before she could fashion another lie. Kaylin came in person 2 days later. He arrived in his Porsche 911, the one Jeremiah had quietly called a compensation package on wheels. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He walked in as if he still lived here, his expensive cologne arriving before he did. Mum. He attempted a hug, a brief, awkward pat on the back. You look tired. Are you sleeping? I'm fine, Kaylin. What brings you there? He looked around the living room, his eyes doing a quick inventory. The furniture, the art, the silent television. Anaya's worried about you. She says you're being distant, making plans. The only plans I'm making are for how to spend my own time, I said, remaining seated. Would you like some coffee? This isn't about coffee, he snapped, then visibly reined himself in, adopting the calm, reasonable tone he used in negotiations. Look, we know we've been distracted. The funeral. The timing was terrible. A critical juncture for the firm. But we're family. You can't just make unilateral decisions that affect all of us. I looked at my son. I saw the little boy who used to trail after Jeremiah in the garden, handing him trowels and asking endless questions. I saw the stranger he had become, a man who viewed family as a stakeholder to be managed. I'm not making decisions that affect all of us, I said quietly. I'm making decisions about what Jeremiah and I built. You made your decisions. You chose not to be here. So this is punishment? His face flushed. For missing the funeral? That's petty, Mum. And Dad would hate it. Don't you dare tell me what your father would hate, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register I didn't recognize. You have no idea what your father hated. He hated dishonesty. He hated ingratitude. He hated people who took and gave nothing back. He sat in that chair for 6 months, Kaylin. 6 months. Waiting for a visit, a call, anything from you that lasted more than 5 minutes. You were closing a deal. Anaya was curating her wellness. He had the decency to look stricken, but it was quickly buried under defensiveness. I provided for this family. I built a life. That's what Dad taught me to do. He taught you to build a life, Kaylin, not just a portfolio. I stood up, my knees protesting. I've modified our will. You and Anaya have been removed as beneficiaries. The shock on his face was almost comical. It was the look of a man who'd just seen a fundamental law of his universe repealed. Removed? You can't just... I can. And I have. Everything goes to Damani. In trust. Damani? He spat the name. He's a kid. He's not even out of college. What does he know about Dad's legacy? About managing assets? More than you think, a voice said from the hallway. We both turned. Damani stood there, a reusable grocery bag in each hand. He'd let himself in the back door, as he often did since Jeremiah got sick, to check on me, to bring food. He was 22, tall and lanky like his grandfather, with the same thoughtful eyes. Uncle Kaylin, he said, setting the bags down on the kitchen counter. His voice was calm, but there was a new firmness in it. Grandpa's legacy wasn't the stock tickers or the property value. It was the Saturday he spent showing me how to repoint the bricks on the chimney. It was the way he always stopped to help Mr. Jenkins next door carry his groceries. It was the story he told me about how he and Grandma lived on peanut butter sandwiches for a year to save the down payment for Hampton Engineering. He looked at me, then back at his uncle. You were always too busy building your own empire to notice what his empire was actually made of. Kaylin stared, utterly speechless. The truth, delivered not by his angry mother, but by the quiet, observant nephew he'd always somewhat patronized, was a blow he hadn't anticipated. He left without another word, the roar of his Porsche engine an angry protest against the quiet street. The formal legal threat arrived a week later. A letter from the firm of Hartwell and Pierce, representing Kaylin J. Hampton and Anaya R. Hampton. It alleged undue influence by an unnamed party, Damani, clearly, and lack of testamentary capacity due to acute grief. It demanded a full neuropsychiatric evaluation and an immediate freeze on all asset transfers. I took it to Charles. He read it, a faint, grim smile touching his lips. Hartwell, ambulance chasers in Armani suits. They'll bill by the hour and promise the moon. He looked at me over his glasses. Your choice, Eliza. We can fight this. We will win. But it will be expensive, time-consuming, and the tabloids might pick it up. Grieving widow battles children over fortune. I don't care about the tabloids, I said, though the thought made my stomach clench. Alternatively, Charles said, leaning forward, we call their bluff. We agree to the evaluation by a mutually agreed, renowned expert, and we propose a mediation. Not to negotiate the will, but to have a reckoning. You present your case, not to a judge, but to them. In a room with their lawyer present. Let them hear it all, with no filter. Then they can decide if they really want to take this to a public court, where all of this, he tapped the folder containing my ledger of loss, becomes discoverable. The idea was terrifying. To sit across from them, to articulate the depth of the hurt. But it was also right. Jeremiah believed in facing things directly. "Set it up," I said. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in a sterile, glass-walled conference room in a downtown high-rise. Kaylin and Anaya arrived together, flanked by a slick, 40-something lawyer named Stephen Pierce. They looked like a wall of expensive wool and judgment. I sat with Charles. Damani waited outside, at my request. This was between me and my children. Pierce began with pompous declarations about natural bonds of affection and the settled expectations of heirs. Then, the mediator, a no-nonsense woman named Gail, turned to me. "Mrs. Hampton, would you like to respond?" I opened my folder. I didn't look at Pierce. I looked at Kaylin and Anaya. "I brought some things to show you," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. First, I slid the printed Instagram posts across the polished table. The yacht, the champagne, the conference room victory shot, the timestamps circled in red. Anaya's hand flew to her mouth. Kaylin's jaw tightened. "These were taken while your father was being buried," I said, while I was the only one there to say goodbye. "Mom, that's out of context," Anaya began, tears springing to her eyes. Performative tears. "Let her finish," Gail said quietly. I slid the next document, the ledger of loss. Not the full financial breakdown, but a summary page. The totals were staggering, even to me. "This is a partial accounting of what your father and I gave you over the years. Not just money. The assumption was that we were building a family, that this generosity would be met with love, respect, and presence." Kaylin scanned the numbers, his face pale. This is private. This isn't relevant." "It's entirely relevant," Charles said. "It establishes a pattern of expectation and entitlement." I took out the final document, the report from Dr. Alastair Chen, the renowned geriatric psychiatrist. He'd spent 3 hours with me. His conclusion was unequivocal. Mrs. Hampton demonstrates exceptional cognitive clarity, detailed recall, and logical reasoning. There is no evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. Her decisions are consistent, reasoned, and based on a clear-eyed assessment of her family dynamics. I placed it on top of the other papers. "You think this is about money?" I said, my voice finally breaking with the weight of it. "It was never about the money. It was about the empty chair at the hospital every single visiting hour. It was about the phone that never rang unless you needed something. It was about your father asking me, 2 days before he died, 'Do they even know I'm here?'" Anaya was truly crying now, silent tears of shame. Kaylin looked down at the table, his shoulders hunched. "The new estate plan stands," I said, gathering my papers. "Everything goes to Damani, in a trust designed to fund his education and the community projects he's passionate about. A lending library at the cabin, scholarships, things that reflect what your father actually valued." I stood up. Charles stood with me. "You can contest this," I said, looking at them one last time. "You can spend a fortune on lawyers, drag our family's name through the mud, and maybe, after years, get a judge to award you a fraction of what you think you deserve. But you will never, ever get back what you've already lost. You lost it the moment you chose a yacht and a deal over your own father." I walked out of the room. I didn't look back. Charles's hand was on my elbow, steadying me. In the hallway, Damani was waiting. He saw my face and simply opened his arms. I leaned into his hug, a sob finally escaping me. Not of grief for Jeremiah, but of grief for the children I'd once had. "It's done," I whispered. The legal threats evaporated. Hartwell and Pierce sent a terse letter the following week, stating their clients were reconsidering their options. They never filed suit. Silence descended. For a month, I heard nothing from Kaylin or Anaya. The phone didn't ring. The house was quiet. Damani became my anchor. He came every Sunday. We'd have lunch, and then we'd work in the garden. We began the long process of reviving Jeremiah's roses, pruning the dead wood, amending the soil, watering with a care that felt like a prayer. One Sunday, he arrived with a rolled-up set of architectural drawings. "For the cabin," he said, spreading them on the kitchen table. They were beautiful. Plans to convert the sturdy log structure into a community library and learning centre, with a dedicated reading room named for Jeremiah. "It'll cost a bit," he said, almost apologetically. "Use the trust," I said. "That's what it's for, to build things that last." The first thaw came from an unexpected direction. Anaya. She showed up one Tuesday morning, not in her usual uniform of designer athleisure, but in jeans and a simple sweater. She was alone. No Malik. She looked smaller. "Mum," she said, standing on the porch like a nervous teenager. "Can I come in?" I let her in. She didn't sit. She paced the living room, finally stopping in front of Jeremiah's chair. "I'm getting a divorce," she blurted out. I was silent, waiting. "It's been over for years. We were just a good picture, a good Instagram grid." She gave a bitter, choked laugh. "I've been such a fool. Such a shallow, selfish fool." She turned to me, her eyes raw. "After the mediation, I couldn't stop thinking. About Dad, about you, about all of it. I went to a therapist. She asked me to write a letter to Dad, to say all the things I didn't say." Her voice broke. I couldn't finish it, because all I could write was, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And it wasn't enough. "It's a start," I said softly. "I don't want the money, Mum," she whispered. "I mean, I do. My life is a mess, and I'm scared. But that's not why I'm here. I want to help Damani with the library. I'm good at organising and outreach. I could help get book donations, set up programming. If you'll let me." I looked at my daughter, seeing for the first time in decades the vulnerable girl beneath the polished facade. The girl who loved books before she loved brands. "Talk to Damani," I said. "It's his project." Kaylin's transformation was slower, more internal. He started calling. Not about money or the will, but awkward, stilted conversations. "How are you, Mum? How's the garden?" He sent a check. Not to me, but to the fund Damani had set up for the library, with "matching grant" in the memo line. He showed up one Saturday in old clothes, without warning, while Damani and I were clearing brush in the backyard. He didn't say much. He just picked up a pair of loppers and started working, his expensive watch getting scratched by thorns. He worked in silence for an hour, sweating in the autumn sun. When he was leaving, he paused by the back porch. "Dad taught me how to prune these," he said, nodding to the rose bushes. I'd forgotten. The first anniversary of Jeremiah's death dawned clear and cold. I went to the cemetery alone in the early morning, as I knew I needed to. I placed a single, perfect Memorial Day rose from our revived garden on his stone. When I returned home, Damani's car was in the driveway, and next to it, Kaylin's sensible new SUV, he'd sold the Porsche, and Anaya's modest sedan. They were in the kitchen, the three of them, moving around each other with a tentative, careful familiarity. Damani was making coffee, Kaylin was scrambling eggs, Anaya was setting the table with our everyday dishes. No one spoke about the will. No one mentioned the past year's war. They talked about the library's upcoming opening, about book donations, about the local newspaper doing a feature. We ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the window over the sink. It was awkward. It was quiet. It was not forgiveness. That would take years, if it ever came. It was something more fragile and more real. Acceptance. And presence. After breakfast, Anaya washed the dishes. Kaylin dried. Damani showed them the latest blueprints. I walked out to the backyard alone. Jeremiah's roses, under Damani's care, and now with Kaylin's hesitant help, were wrapped in burlap for the winter. But they were alive. The canes were green and strong beneath their covering. I touched the rough burlap. "They're here, Jeremiah," I whispered. "They're finally here." The inheritance was never the money, the house, or the cabin. Jeremiah's true legacy was the stubborn belief that people could grow, could change, could remember what mattered, even if it took the coldest winter to remind them. And as I stood in the garden we'd built together, with the sound of my family's tentative voices drifting from the house, I knew the seeds we'd planted so long ago hadn't all fallen on barren ground. Some, against all odds, were finally starting to grow. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.